All right, so let's begin. Let's daven that the fruit of our learning should help to bring home the final hostages still being held and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents and bring an end to our wars.
Amen.
Um, okay, so what we see here, I want to look at this Mishnah here. This is the Mishnah at the beginning of the fourth chapter of Kiddushin, and I want to mention this. This is kind of a secondary point for us. But last week we were looking at the Mishnah in Masechet Machshirin, which we'll revisit because our Gemara quotes it. But it talked about if somebody finds a tinok mushlach, right, a tinok who is like abandoned in a city. And if the city is mostly Jews, then we consider him to be Jewish. And the city's mostly non-Jews, we consider him to be non-Jewish. And if it's half and half, we consider him to be Jewish. And then the Gemara, the question, the Gemara is for what purpose do we consider him to be Jewish? And one of them is liyachsel, uh, to trace his lineage. So what does that mean? So we should just look at this Mishnah. This gives us some basic definitions of yichus that are relevant here. So, so Michael, since you're not walking, you can read this Mishnah, Asara Yachasin.
Asara Yochasin Alu Mebaval, Kone Livei Yisraelei Halalei Garei Becharurei Mamzerei Netinei Shtukei Va'asufei.
Okay, keep reading, yeah.
Kone Livei Yisraelei Mutarim Levo Ze Bezeh. Livei Yisrael Chalalei Gerei V'Chararei Mutarim Levo Ze Bezeh. Gerei V'Chararei Mamzer V'Natinei Shtukei V'Asufei Kulam Mutarim Levo Ze Bezeh.
Okay. So, I'm not going to have you translate this as such. I'll go through it because the mission itself is going to explain some of the more obscure terms here. So I'll just say, so Asara Yochasin, so there were 10 Yochasin, 10, genealogical lineages that made Aliyah from Babylonia. So it's Kohanim, Levim, Yisraelim. Those are ones we all know. Chalalei, which are Chalalim. So what are Chalalim? So the Bartanura tells us, Chalalei are Kohanim shenoldu min hapsulot lakahuna. So a Chalal is a Kohen that is born to those who were to women who were psulot lekuhuna. And what are those women? It's from a union with such a woman. Kigon almana lekohen gadol, grusha chalala zona lekohen hediot. So the Torah forbids a kohen gadol from marrying a widow, and it forbids all kohanim to marry a grusha, a divorced woman, or a chalala, or a woman who was born of one of these marriages, or a zona, the kohen hedyot. Zona being a woman who, we translate as a prostitute. It's a little more exacting than that, but we'll leave it at that for the moment. So then we have, here's Michael Werner. Geire, we know what Geirim are, so people who have converted. Charurei, but it's freed slaves.
Uh,
Avadim Meshucharim. Hi, Michael Werner. We're just learning a Mishnah here, and you just missed a couple of lines. We'll be going over them. Nitinei are Givonim Shemalu Bimei Yeshua, right? So this in Sefer Yeshua it talks about the Nitinim. And who were the Nitinim? They were the Givonim. So if you remember the story, the Givonim were the people who saw the invasion of Yeshua and Bnei Israel, and they sent some representatives, they dressed themselves up as if they had come from a very far distance to make peace with him, and essentially fooled Yeshua into making a treaty when Yeshua wasn't really allowed to make a treaty with them. Those are the Givonim. And so what ended up happening with them is that they were put into a kind of semi-servitude, and they had to have Brit Milah, but they weren't. It wasn't a full conversion, and they were forbidden from marrying into Bnei Israel. And Shtuke ve'asufe mifareshuhu ba'azil. That's the next Mishnah will tell us what Shtuki and asufe are. So then the Mishnah explains. All right, so for everyone's benefit, including Michael Werner, I'll just go back and read the beginning. So these are the 10 Yochassid, the 10 lineages that made Aliyah from Babylonia. So we know the first three, Kohanim, Leviim, and Yisraelim. And then the Chalalim we just defined, right? So those are children who were born of a marriage between a Kohen and somebody that the Kohen or the Kohen Gadol was not allowed to marry. Gerim, Avadim Meshucharim. So Avadim Meshucharim, of course, means an Eved Kanani, right? A non-Jewish Eved, a non-Jewish slave. So as we've mentioned in the past, a non-Jewish slave, in order to be accepted as a non-Jewish slave, had to undergo Brit Milah and had to accept upon himself all of the mitzvot that a woman is obligated to do. Mamzerim are this machloket in Yibamot about exactly what a mamzer is, but mamzer is somebody who is born of a forbidden marriage, a halakhically forbidden marriage. Let's just leave it at that. The Nitinim we just defined, and then Shtuke V'Yasufi we'll define in a moment. So Michael Schwartz, now continue reading. Kahane Leviye V'Yisraeli.
Kane v'levaye v'Yisraelei mutarim levo ze b'zeh. Levaye Yisrael chalalei gerei v'charurei mutarim levo ze b'zeh. Gerei v'chacharei mamzerei v'nitinei shtukei v'asufei kulam mutarim levo ze b'zeh.
Okay, so can you explain that?
So it's talking about who can marry, who's permitted to marry who. So the Kohanim, the Leviim, and the Israelis are allowed to marry each other. The Leviim and the Israelis are allowed to marry Chalalim, Gerim, and the free slaves. And then the converts and the freed slaves, the Mamzerim and the Nitanim and the Shtukei and Vesufei are allowed to intermarry each other, allowed to marry each other.
Right. So
it's one thing it doesn't mean that they're each individual one of those subgroups are able to marry within that individual subgroup, or they're able to marry across the subgroups.
That's a good question. So it means the subgroups can marry each other, and then the chidush of the Mishnah is that there are certain subgroups that can marry within each other. We could make like a chart. You could see the different levels here. So where Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim can all marry each other. of course, now there are exceptions in the sense that but the exception would be the chalolim. The chalolim were originally either a Kohen, Levi, or Yisrael, but they were born of such a lineage, except that the marriage that they were born from, or the union they were born from, was forbidden for Kohanim. So again, so if a widow married a Kohen Gadol and they had a child, so the child is a halal. So they're no longer allowed to marry. They're no longer allowed to marry Kohanim, right? But Chalalim and Gerim and Abadim Shucharim, they are permitted to labozet bezan, right? They're permitted to marry each other. And the Gerim and the Abadim Shucharim, the Mamzerim, the Netinim, the Shtukim, and the Asufim, they're all allowed to marry each other. So let's just do this next Mishnah. So Michael Werner, you can read the next Mishnah, the Elohim.
ואלו הם שתוקי, כל שהוא מכיר את אמו ואינו מכיר את אביו. אסופי כל שנאסף מן השוק ואינו מכיר לא אביו ולא אמו. אבא שאול היה קורא לשתוקי בידוקי.
Okay, so why don't you translate that?
So these are the shetuke. Everyone who knows his mother but doesn't know his father. Asufe are as everyone, I guess it'd be like foundlings, everyone who is like gathered from the shuk.
Yeah.
Foundlings, and he doesn't know either his father or his or her father or her mother.
Okay.
Abba Shaul used to read for the term shetukim, people who we've checked the back.
Okay, so right. Okay, so Abba Shul haya korei lishtuke, he would call, right? Korei also means call.
Of course.
Right? He would call a shtuke a beduke. And right, so why are the shtukim called shtukim? So the Bartanura tells us shtuke is kol shu makir et imo. It's anyone who knows who his mother is. Shekorei Abba v'imo mishatketo. But if he calls somebody his father, his mother shuts him up. So of course, this is an inherent truth that it's always. I mean, certainly before the age of blood testing or DNA testing, but throughout history, you could always know for certain, in principle, who the mother is, because whoever attended the birth saw the baby come from the mother. But even if the father was right there, you don't know for sure if he's the father, right? This has always been a truth. So there's a difference in this sense between the mother and the father. But the mother,
this reminds me of the famous midrash on Yitzhak. And so there's the gossip that Avimelech is really the father, and so God actually molds his face.
Yeah, right. Rashi brings down the midrash, right? That Ela Toldot Abraham Yitzchak, right? Abraham Ela Toldot Yitzchak Abraham. That's what it is. Ela Toldot Yitzchak Abraham Holidat Yitzchak, and the medrash is the Ela Toldot Yitzchak Abraham. That Yitzchak looked like Abraham. Beduke. Right, Shabotkin et imo. So Abba Shaul changed. He used a different term because he had a different concept, slightly different concept. Beduke is somebody that you can check. You checked to see who the mother is. And then Imam Ra L'Chashem Ibalti, if she makes the claim that I had a sexual union with someone who is kasher. So now we understand that kasher in this context would mean what?
Somebody, okay, no. I mean, basically somebody with whom the offspring would not be a mamzer, I'm assuming.
Well, I would broaden it. I would say somebody with whom that she was allowed to have a union with. So, because now we see it's not we're not only talking about mamzerim, we also have these other categories of the like halal, right? So a woman who, if a woman was nivalet to, if she, a woman was nivalet to Kohen with whom she wasn't allowed to have a union with, that would also be in question, right? So if she says kasher nivalti havlad kasher, then the child we're to go after the mother's self testimony, her own testimony, to say if she was nivela to somebody that with whom she was allowed to have a union, that would not in any way be posel her offspring. So he called it a beduki.
And so it's interesting that it's interesting that they take the mother's word.
Yeah, and this is discussed elsewhere. There's a similar discussion in the first chapter of Ketubot, which is more extensive, and it's actually a sugya that I almost did with you because it's the sugya there in the Gemara deals. It's one of the sugyot that deals with this question of rov and mechza and so forth. But I decided not to do it because I want to keep going here. Hold on a second. I think actually this is it's also a Mishnah here in Yevamos, which is here. Actually, yeah, let's just look at this one. So in Yevamos, I don't know if you've ever, Michael Schwartz, did you ever learn Yevamos in
Yeah,
Kitzur?
yeah.
Okay, so you'll remember, I'm sure, that the beginning of Yevamos.
I'm not so sure.
No, I was going to say what you'll remember is there are a lot of complex mishnayot in the first few chapters. Michael Werner, did you ever learn Yevamos? Did you ever learn it? Okay, so you know the din of Yibum, basically, right? If you have a couple of brothers, and one of the brothers was married and he died without any sons, then his brother, the surviving brother, there's a mitzvah for him to be miyabem, the widow of his brother. And Yibum is similar to, but not precisely the same as conventional marriage. So the Mishnah here in Yevamos, it starts, as it happens, I'm just reviewing Yevamos now. The Mishnah in the beginning gives us various relations that are forbidden between people, right? And those are called erva, right? So a woman can be an erva, let's say, what's this? Well, it'll take way too long to go through this. I'll just give you an example. So an example where this concept of erva is going to be relevant is, let's say the we have two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven married wait a second. I'm also thinking maybe I don't have to go into this. I don't want to confuse the matters. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip it. Let's just look at this because here the Mishnah gives us some definitions also. Yeah, it talks about Isur Mitzvah and Isur Kedusha. There's Isur Mitzvah, there's Isur Erva, and Isur Kedusha. So Isur Erva, Chal Amru B'Yavama, Kol Shehi Isur Erva, Lo Choletzet V'lo Mityabemet. Well, I'm going to have to explain this a little bit. Let's say we have Reuven and Shimon. Reuven was married to two wives, and then he died without issue, right? Without having sons. And so the brother, in principle, should marry one or the other. Now, the two women who were married to Reuven, they're called tsarot, right? So they have, by dint of the fact that they had been married to the same man at the same time, they have a certain kind of halachic relationship. And for the purposes of Yibum, if one of the women, now one of the widows, is asura to the brother, that is for other reasons, in other words, reasons having nothing to do with the brother himself, but rather, let's say that the brother had married, um, uh, let's say that the brother had married.
Well, the sister of one of the brothers.
So yes, so for example, so Chamesh Esrei Nashim Potrot Tzarotehen V'Tzarot Tzarotehen Mina Chalitza Mina Yibum Ad Sof HaOlam. There are 15 women. This is the very first Mishnah. There are 15 women who exempt their tzarot, right? So the woman, right? So the tzara is the wife or the wives who were married to the same person as any given woman. V'tzarot tzarotzehan min hachalitza. So there are 15 women that exempt their tzarot from chalitza and from yibum ad sof haolam, forever. And the ad sof haolam we're definitely not going to go into today. But the Elohim, so we'll just do this one, Bito. Right? So if it was so the brother, Reuven, married the daughter of Shimon, which is a permissible marriage. And then he married somebody else who wasn't related. So you might have thought that if he died without sons, that Shimon could marry the one who wasn't related to him. But what the Mishnah is telling us is that since one of the widows is forbidden to him, she exempts her tzara. She exempts the second wife. So the second wife, even though she was in principle permitted, she's not permitted because she's a tzara to the first one. So they will. So the first one, the one who's his daughter, right? The one who is Shimon's daughter, she was a sister-in-law, but also also his daughter. So he can certainly not marry his daughter, right? That's a forbidden union. And so the second wife is also forbidden. That's the basic idea. So these women here, they are called Isurei Erva. It's just that's the technical halachic term. They're called an Isur. That's called an Isur Erva. And so the Mishnah here in the second chapter, it gives us this general rule. Klal amru b'yevama, kol shehi Isur Erva. Right. So this is a general rule to keep in mind any woman who is asur bishum erva, right? She's in this category of being an erva. So lo choletzet v'lo mityabemet. In other words, there's no ceremony at all because there can never be a union. So the Torah does not mandate any kind of a ceremony, right? Chalitza is only relevant if the union could have taken place. So here the union cannot take place. He can never, let's say in our example, Shimon can never marry his daughter, even though his daughter was married to his brother, but he can never marry her. She's an Isur Erba. So in that case, lo choletzet velo mityabemet. Isura Isur mitzvah, the Isur kedusha. So these are other categories of Isur. There's such a thing as Isur mitzvah, which the Mishnah will explain in a moment, and Isur Kedusha. So in those cases, Choletzet velo mityabemet. There is, even though they can't make a union, nonetheless, there is an aspect midioraita that would say they could have a union, and so, but midrabanan, they're not allowed to have a union. So there, because there, in principle, had there not been a gzeira d'Rabbanan, there could have been yibum. Then they would have done either yibum or chalitza. But here, because there's an isur midrabanan, they do neither, right? I'm sorry, they don't do yibum, but they do chalitza. Achota shehi yavimta, his sister, who turns out to be his yavama, she either does chalitza or yibum. Mishnah explains that later on, what that case is, and we're not going to get into it. But the Bartanur here explains lo choletzet v'lo mityabemet sarata. In other words, again, we're talking here about the second wife, the other wife who did not have any relationship to the yavam, but kol sheken, he all the more so she would neither do chalitza or yibum. That's the isurei erva. V'chein ayalonit, which we're going to skip. Okay, so what's an isur mitzvah? Isur mitzvah shniot midivrei sofrim. So there's this idea that there are certain arayot that the Torah forbade, and those are what you read right in the end of Achrei Mot, in Kedoshim. It has a list of people that you're not allowed to have a union with. And then the Rabbanan added on another layer of relations that someone isn't, that a person is not allowed to have a union with. So those are called shniyot, the secondaries, as it were. So we have isur erba. Those are women that are forbidden midioraita to a particular person. And then there's shniyot that are similar, but the isur is midrabanan. And what's an isur kedusha? So that's what we just alluded to in the Mishnah in Kiddushin. Almanah kohen gadol, grusha b'chalutza lekohen hedyot, mamzeret netina Yisrael, ubat Yisrael natinu mamzer. So an isur kedusha is also it's also a union that's forbidden. And even when the Torah mandated it, but they're not arayot in the same way. And so they have a separate category. So widow to a Kohen Gadol, a divorcee, or a chalutza, right? Somebody who had chalitza is similar. The woman who undergoes chalitza is called a chalutza, and her halachic category for this chalutza is similar to a grusha. So she's also not allowed to marry a kohen hadiot, a kohen who's not a kohen gadol. Mamzeret and Netina Yisrael. Mamzeret or Netina is not allowed to marry a Yisrael. And a Bat Yisrael is not allowed to marry a Netin or a Mamzer. Okay. So that's enough of Yivamot. So why did we do all of that? Because we're looking back at our Gemara, but just one second.
Shale,
Yes.
any of those things relevant today?
Oh, they're all relevant. Well, are they all relevant? I mean, yeah, I mean that these halachot are
People
still,
don't care.
well, no, people do care. It depends which people. No, certainly everybody I think is familiar with arayot, like you don't marry your mother, or your sister, or your, you know,
That's okay.
okay. But the Almanah Kohen Gadol is not really enforced because there is no Kohen Gadol today. But Rusha v'Chalutza, the Kohen Hediot, that's still relevant today. And Kohanim, who are Shomrei Mitzvot, right? They will not marry a Grusha or a Chalutza. And the same, and this is also Mamzerut is also still relevant today, and this is why Mamzerut is it's a big issue, right? That people try to find heterim for Mamzerim or Mamzerot so that they can marry. But these halachot are still certainly enforced. The fact that some people ignore them doesn't mean that they're not relevant. I mean, people eat treif, you know. Rav Savitsky told
No, that's okay. That's they eat treif, but this has repercussions on the children who
yes.
are not.
Yes, it does.
It's not their fault, and they are just born like that.
Yes, it does, and it's not fair. They are just born like that. There are stories in the Gemara about that as well. But yeah, it's a difficult. It can be a very, very difficult and painful issue for people. Hold on a second. But we're not really here to do a diyun about that. I just wanted to lay down some basic terms, right? So get some basic idea of what's going on here. So now you'll all remember that we looked at this Mishnah last week, and we're talking about the Tinok Mushlach. So now we have a little more context about the Tinok Mushlach, right? So an abandoned child. So if you find in a city an abandoned child, if most of the people in the city are Nachrim, or not Jewish, we consider him to be a Nachri. If most of the people in the city are Jewish, we consider him to be Jewish. If it's half and half, we consider him to be Jewish. Okay? So we said the Gemara deals with this question, for what purpose will we consider this Tinok Mushlach to be Jewish or not Jewish? What does it matter to us if he's Jewish or not Jewish? So there we saw Machloket. And it goes like this. So, right, this is the mission that we just read. Miyamar Shmuel Hafi. So now we have to put this back into the context that we're talking about in Yoma. So the context in Yoma had to do with Shmuel's statement that was relevant here in Yoma. So what was Shmuel's statement that we were dealing with the last couple of weeks? What was Shmuel talking about?
So if I recall, he's describing some instance where we do not go after the road.
Well, that's almost 100% perfect. The problem was he was not describing the instances. What did he say?
He's saying that we do not go after the rove. in making a determination of pikuach nefesh in case
Stop.
of
You said enough, right? So that when it comes to a case of pikuach nefesh, if we have in front of us a case of pikuach nefesh, not that we are making a determination of pikuach nefesh, we know this is pikuach nefesh, then we don't go after the rov. So in the last couple of weeks, we went through this Gemara where the Gemara is trying to figure out what case is in what case would I invoke Shmuel's klal that in pikuach nefesh I don't go after the rov, and we went through different cases, trying to find a case where that would be relevant. So a case where it's going to be relevant is going to be a case when we don't have where we have a rov that would argue against doing pikuach nefesh. That is saving somebody's life, like, let's say violating Shabbat to save somebody's life on Shabbat. We have a case that argues against that, and Shmuel would come and say, no, but in this case, even though there's a rov that would argue against it, we're still going to violate Shabbos, right? That's what he means when he says, "Lo hachu b'pikuach nefesh achar harov." That's Shmuel's statement. So now the Gemara says, "Umi amar Shmuel hachi." Did Shmuel actually say that? Did he really say that when it comes to pikuach nefesh, we don't go after the rov? V'hatanan. But here we learn a Mishnah in Masachet Machshirin. Matzah bat tinok mushlach. If we found an abandoned child, if most of the city is goyim, he's a goy, right? And the girsa that we just saw, it says nachri and nachrim, same thing, right? If it's non-Jews, if most of the city is non-Jewish, then he's considered non-Jewish. Most of the city is Jewish, we consider him to be Jewish. If it's mechza mechza, if it's half Jews, half non-Jews, we consider him to be Jewish. Now, the Amar Rav. So, Paul, read Rav. Amar Rav.
לא שנו אלא להחיותו, אבל יחסו לא.
Okay, stop. So just stop. So explain, what does that mean? What do the words mean?
Well, they say that this example was about saving his life, but not about deciding if he's Jew or not a Jew. To fight, not to decide about his lineage or something.
His lineage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. So in other words, not just whether he's a Jew or not a Jew, like what his yichus is, right? So now we know there's asara yuchasin. That's the Mishnah in Kiddushin. So the fact that he's a Tinok Mushlach, so when did Rav say this? Lo shanu, they didn't learn except to keep him alive. They didn't. Who didn't learn what? What specifically in the Mishnah wasn't learned except for the purpose of keeping this child alive? What are the words?
Matzah batinok mushlach. It didn't say that the tinok was in danger. They just found him.
Okay, so it's definitely going to include the words matzah bat tinok mushlach, because we have to be talking about someone. So we're talking about tinok mushlach. So in what case was Rav talking about when he says lo shanu elo hachyoto? So in what case here in the Mishnah would I be inclined to think that he's considered to be someone whose life I would save under any circumstance? So
I'm not. Mushlach, does it mean that he's in danger, or is it just
no? It doesn't mean that he's in danger.
It doesn't mean that.
No,
That's what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
right? Zelo. He's just a tinok mushlach. So for our purposes, it means he's unidentified. I don't know. What don't I know about this tinok?
Nothing. I know only how many people are
Okay,
Jewish
but what is
in
the
the
Mishnah?
town.
What does the Mishnah want to know? What does the Mishnah not know about this tinok?
Whose parents are?
Okay,
Or
what does the
whose
Mishnah
mother
say?
is?
What are the terms of the Mishnah? What is the Mishnah talking about?
And they don't know if
We don't
he's
know
a
who the
Jew or
mother
not.
is.
No, it doesn't say anything about the mother. You're right in principle, but what does the Mishnah say? Don't make it complicated.
I make everything complicated.
No, I know.
That's
Don't make it complicated. What does the Mishnah
the
say?
Mishnah doesn't know if he is a Jew or not.
Yes, that is simple. We don't know if he's a goy or if he's a Jew. That's all the Mishnah is talking about, right? So for our purpose, so we have a tinok mushlach. I don't know if he's a Jew or if he's a goy. So the Mishnah gives us a methodology whereby I will establish for some halachic purpose whether he is a Jew or whether he is a goy. So what is that methodology? What do I do? Because I don't know anything about him personally, then what do I do?
I decide according to the Rov.
I decide according to the Rov. So if most of the people are
And if there's
goyim,
a draw, then you go to the side of the Jew. Yes.
okay, right. If it's even, then I say in Rov Yisrael mechzal mechza Yisrael. So now Rav says we didn't learn, meaning we didn't learn in the Mishnah about this tinok mushlach. That what? What was the last thing I learned about the tinok mushlach in the Mishnah?
If it's chetzi,
If it's chetzi, what's the din?
he's treated as a Jew.
He's treated as a Jew. So in that Rav is now commenting, my inclination is going to be that Rav must be commenting on this end of the Mishnah. Right? So at the end of the Mishnah, we have a case of mechzul mechza. Mechzul mechza, I consider him to be a Jew. So Rav says, Lo shanu, we didn't learn that in this case where the tinok mushlach was found in a city that's half Jewish and half non-Jewish, I only learned that for the purpose of lahachyoto, to keep him alive. And what do we think that means here, lahachyoto? Like what in what instance will I keep him alive?
And basically seeing to his basic necessities.
Yeah, no, but in a halachic sense, why would I need to know that about anybody, lachyoto?
Is it not to uncover the pile in case he was with a mapellet?
A mapolet, right? In other words, I need to know if he's Jewish to know if I'm going to try to save his life, even if it means that I'm going to be mechalel Shabbat. In other words, otherwise, of course, I can try to save anybody's life. But when it comes to Shabbos, as a Jew, I'm restricted. So if it's a fellow Jew, I have an obligation to try to keep them alive. If it's not a fellow Jew, then I don't have such an obligation. Okay? So again, Lo Shanu, they didn't learn in this Mishnah regarding a Tinok Mushlach who was found in a city where it was half Jewish and half non-Jewish. I didn't learn that he's considered to be a Jew except for the purpose of keeping him alive on Shabbat or on Chag or whatever, whenever that's going to be relevant. Aval yachso lo. But regarding his, establishing his yichus, establishing his lineage, no. Meaning what? What does that mean about yachso lo?
In that case, he's not considered a Jew.
In what case is he not considered to be a Jew?
In the 50-50 case, he's with respect to the lineage, he's not considered a Jew.
Okay, so if we're talking right, so if Rav is commenting on the last part of the Mishnah of Mechza, So he's telling me, Mechza Mechza, that the Mishnah says, I consider the Tinok Mushlach to be a Yisrael. I only say that, in other words, now I know the kid, but I don't know his lineage. So if he's in danger on Shabbat, I'll save his life. But liachso, if I want to establish his lineage for the purpose of getting married, so no, I will not consider him to be a Jew for the purpose of getting married. That's Rav's din. That's how Rav learns the Mishnah. Shmuel Amar, l'fakech alav et agal. So Shmuel says, right, to uncover the pile for him. So Shmuel's statement is not a full statement. What's the beginning of Shmuel's statement that was left out for brevity's sake?
We don't follow the rove in determining whether to remove debris from on top of him.
You're in the right direction, but anybody else? Michael Schwartz? What's the beginning of Shmuel's statement?
Is he replying to Rav about lo shenu ele de lechayoto v'gam lefakeach alav et hagal?
Right, or not necessarily begam, but the part that's missing is lo shanu ela. Right, in other words, Rav says about the Mishnah, we didn't learn in this Mishnah XYZ except lahachyoto. Shmuel says we didn't learn in the Mishnah, but it leaves out the words lo shanu ela, right? Because again, it's for brevity. It's just but that's the beginning of Shmuel's statement that's not actually in the Gemara. But it means Shmuel said, we didn't learn the Mishnah of mechza except the fakeach alav et hagal. So what's the problem now? If that's true, what's our problem with Shmuel? What does that imply?
It would not necessarily, it applies only in the case of a mapollet removing the debris, but does not apply to other instances.
Okay. What was Shmuel's statement that we're dealing with? His statement was lo halchu b'fikuach nefesh achar harov. If they're right, we don't use the rov to determine whether or not we're going to be Mechal Shabbos. And what is Shmuel saying here?
He's suggesting a much narrower case, that we meant Mechalal Shabbos only for the purposes of removing debris in case of a mapollet.
No, the emphasis here isn't on l'fakech et hagal per se. L'fakech et hagal is also just a shorthand for being Mechal Shabbos. If I'm l'fakech et hagal, it means I'll be Mechal Shabbos for whomever.
So it only applies for the person that Mechalal Shabbos. It would not apply in cases of other cases of Pekuach Nefesh. Pekuach Nefesh.
No. You're putting the emphasis on the wrong place again.
It's whether we consider the baby a Jew or not. So we're actually, in this case, we would go after the rove. We'd only do it if the rove of the city and therefore the baby was considered a Jew.
Okay, so in other words, what we established a moment ago with Rav is that Rav seems to be talking about this last part of the Mishnah, Mechza Yisrael. Could be he's also talking about Imrov Yisrael, right? And in both of those cases, where I established that he's a Jew, Rav says, I only learned that he's a Jew in the Mishnah for the purpose of lahachyoto, but not for yichus. Okay, that's Rav. Shmuel says, I only learned that he's a Jew for the purpose of the fakech alav et hagal, which seems to be the same thing that Rav said about lahachyoto, right? And let's assume for the moment that it is. But what's the point? Shmuel is then, if that's true, then Shmuel is saying the only time that I will be Mechal Shabbos for a Tinok Mushlach is if I know that either he came from a rove of Jews or at least a mechza shel Jews. But if he came from a miyut, in other words, if most of the city was goyim, then what would be the din according to Shmuel?
Here, the din would be that we don't do it, but earlier he
That we
said
don't
we
do
should
what?
Well, excuse me, that we don't uncover the gal or the pikuach nefesh. We don't save the life of a non-Jew on Shabbat.
Right? And go
Whereas
and now
earlier,
continue what you were saying.
so
Where
earlier, if we did not follow after the rove, it wouldn't matter. In all the cases, we would mechalel Shabbat to save the life.
right. In other words, if it's true that Shmuel said that we don't go after pikuach, we don't go after rov regarding pikuach nefesh, so here it shouldn't matter to Shmuel how many Jews or non-Jews are in this city. If I find a tinok mushlach, and there's even a 1.1, like a 0.1% chance that he's a Jew, Pikuach nefesh lo hochin achar rov. Regarding pikuach nefesh, I don't use the rov. So if this child's life needed saving on Shabbos, I should be mechal Shabbos for it. But that's not what Shmuel says. Shmuel says the fakech alav et agal. And I understand what he means is that when the Mishnah says that if rov Yisrael or mechza Yisrael, Shmuel says that means that I'll be mefakech alav on that child. I'll be mefakech alav etzagal. I'll be b'chal Shabbos, but not if he came from a city that was mostly non-Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a direct contradiction to what Shmuel said earlier. Does everybody understand that? Okay, Michael Werner, what did I just say?
So whereas earlier he said that we Mechalel Shabbos in any case of pikuach nefesh, we don't follow the rov. But in this case, he seems in the case of the tinok, it would seem that we do follow the rov.
Right, and what's my indication that we follow the rov? How do we see that Shmuel says we're following the rov? What did the Mishnah say, and what does Shmuel say?
So the Mishnah says that we regard him as being a Jew if the majority of the people in the city are Jews, or if it's chetzi.
Okay.
And Shmuel is saying, no, we only save his life if the rove of the people in the city are Jewish.
So well, Shmuel is saying l'fakech alav etzagal. So he's saying lo shanu, right? Again, because we have to add in the words that are missing in Shmuel's statement. He's saying, I didn't learn this Mishnah except to tell me that I'm going to be mechal Shabbos l'fakech alav etzagal for a tinok mushlach if it came from a city that was rov Yisrael or mechza Yisrael. So he's telling me it's just to tighten your statement, Michael, right? So he's telling me that here I have a case of pikuach nefesh, velo hochin achar rov. I'm sorry, excuse me. Hochin achar rov. I'm going after the rov to tell me that if it was a city of rov goyim, I wouldn't be mefakech alav etzagal. So that and they're so it's a contradiction to Shmuel earlier, who says, Pikuach nefesh, I don't go after the rov. Here, Shmuel is saying, it's pikuach nefesh, and I go after the rov. So if it's mostly Jews, then I'll save his life. If it's mechza, that's like a rov for this purpose, I'll save his life. But if the rov would argue against saving his life, I don't save his life. And Shmuel said earlier, if there's a rov arguing against saving somebody's life on Shabbat, I don't go after the rov and I save his life. So it's a direct contradiction. So what's the answer? So Michael Schwartz, Ki itmar de Shmuel.
Ki itmar de Shmuel, Arisha itmar imrov goyim goy. Amar Shmuel, le'inyan pikuach nefesh eno ken.
Okay, so what does all that mean?
So when it was stated of Shmuel, it was stated about the first part of the Mishnah, imrov goy goy, if the majority of the town is goyim, then he's treated as a goy. And Shmuel says, and in the issue of pikuach nefesh, this is not so.
Okay, so in your own words, can you say what's the Gemara's answer to this kasha?
So we assume that when what Shmuel was talking about was the last two parts of the Mishnah, those last two statements, where now it's saying that he's really referring to the first statement about in the case where the rove of the city or goyim is then we would treat the child as a goy, and then we would go ahead. Even so, we would go ahead and mechalel Shabbat in order to save the life of the child. But I'm not sure about the last bit, but because then it says Amar Shmuel for the Indian of Pekuach Nefesh, Enu Ken, that we don't save the life. Then it's not clear to me what that means.
No. What's Eino Ken? What is not so?
Indian Pekuach Nefesh is not so. So it's not so that
We don't follow the rope.
it's not so that that
that we treat him as a guy. It's not so imrov goy. It's not so that we treat him as a guy. We treat him as Israel in the case of Inyan Pikuach Nefesh.
Right. So it's not that in that case it's that we don't that it's Michael Werner, you were almost right. It's the other way though. That is
Thank you, Michael.
Goyim goy, and Shmuel is saying, but we don't treat him as a goy inyan pikuach nefesh. That is, we don't go after the rove. Right? In other words, so the ratio of the Mishnah says, if most of the people in the city are goyim, and I find a tinok mushlach, I consider him to be a goy. That's what the Mishnah says. And so it's telling me that I go after the rove to tell me if this child is a goy or a Jew. And Shmuel says, but not for the purpose of pikuach nefesh. So what is it saying? That when it comes to pikuach nefesh, I don't go after the rove. And then it lines up perfectly with what Shmuel said earlier. So what you see here is we have these statements by Rav and Shmuel, which I know are statements about this Mishnah in Machshirim. That would have been the Masoret, right? That would have been the tradition that everybody knew that Rav and Shmuel were talking about. They were commenting on that Mishnah. But there was a mistake made in transmission because people thought that Shmuel was commenting on the end of the Mishnah. And now the Gemara is correcting that to say, no, Shmuel was commenting on the beginning of the Mishnah. And how do I know that? Because I have another verified statement by Shmuel that would understand in the same way. In other words, then it would make sense that if Shmuel said elsewhere that b'pikuach nefesh lo halchu acha harov, that he was also making his comment applicable here in the Mishnah in Machshirim. So that ends this part of the sugya. Okay. I don't think we're gonna, even though I did some of this stuff in Kiddushin, I'm not gonna do this Rashi here. Right, just lo shanu, Rav's statement, they didn't learn this Mishnah that what? The Imrov Yisrael, the Chazkinan Le Yisrael, Elo Hachyoto, right? That they didn't learn in a Mishnah that if the town was mostly Jews, that I hold him, I give him a chazak, I give a chazaka to this child that he's a Jew. I only give him that chazaka for the purpose of keeping him alive, but not for yichus. And then Rashi goes into that a little bit more. I'm going to leave that because it's not important so much for what we're doing. Okay, this is a good place to stop here in the Gemara. And I think I'm going to leave for next time. We'll make this a little shorter than usual, which I think is okay. So next time, this was a lot to take in. I think everybody can agree. There's a lot to keep in your head here. But I'll just leave you with some thoughts, and then next week we're going to start looking at, we want to look at the Rambam and some other Rishonim, and we'll at least look at the Shulchan Aruch to see how this shakes out in halacha. So at the end of the sugya now, what we've demonstrated is that I've upheld, it seems like at the end of the sugya, I have upheld Shmuel's statement that in Pikuach Nefesh, I don't go after the Rav. One might think that would be a reasonable thing to think at the end, right? Because the Gemara, especially now in this last bit that we did, went out of its way to make sure that Shmuel lined up with, Shmuel's statement on Machshirin lined up with his statement that Pikuach Nefesh, I don't go after the Rav. So at the end, I understand that's the Shita of Shmuel, that in Pikuach Nefesh, I don't go after the Rav. And what about Rav? So Rav said, Lo shanu ela hachyoto. I only learned this Mishnah that Rov Yisrael, for the purpose of keeping him alive. So what does Rav think about this question of Pikuach Nefesh and Rov? In other words, would he agree or disagree with Shmuel, who said, "B'pikuach nefesh lo hafu achar Rov"? Would he agree with that, or would he disagree with that?
He would disagree with it, no?
He would disagree with it. In other words, because Rav is saying, since we didn't change Rav is still referring to the part of the Mishnah that says, if Rov Yisrael, or Mechza Yisrael, but it implies that if Rov of the city is Nachri or Goyim, then I wouldn't be Mechaye. In other words, I wouldn't be Mechal Shabbos to keep this child alive. So he says, if I were to make a similar statement for Rav would say, Gamba Pikuach Nefesh Hochi Nachar Rov. Right? Shmuel says, Lo hachu b'pikuach nefesh achar rov, and Rav would be saying, Gam b'pikuach nefesh hachu achar rov. It would be a machloket now between Rav and Shmuel. And then I also had the statement earlier from Rabbi Yochanan, where if you remember, Rabbi Yochanan was brought as a kasha on Shmuel's statement. Because we had this statement, Hama Rabbi Yasim, Rabbi Yochanan, Tisha goyim v'Yisrael echad, b'ota chatzer mefakchin, v'chatzer acheret ein mefakchin. And that we brought that as a contradiction to Shmuel. And then we said it's not necessarily a contradiction because Hai de parush kulhu, Hai de parush miktzatayhu. And what we understood that to mean is that Rabbi Yochanan, in his statement, he was talking when he said, "B'chatzer acheret ein mefakchin." That was talking about a case where there was in Chatzer Aleph, there were Tisha Goyim v'Yisrael Echad. There were 9 non-Jews and 1 Jew, and then Miktzatayu, some of them, or maybe even just one of them, went into a different chatzer, and a mapolet fell on him, and he says, "B'chatzer," and Rabbi Yochanan said, "B'chatzer acheret ein mefakrin," and that would also see if that's true, if that's what Rabbi Yochanan was saying, then Rabbi Yochanan would also be saying that b'pikuach nefesh kain halchu achar harov, right? Because if one of them left this group in Chatzer Aleph, so we said kol parush merubika parush. Anyone who left a group left from the majority. The majority were non-Jews, and then that person, this question mark person, went to another Chatzer, and a mapolet fell on him. So now Rabbi Yochanan is saying, I'm not mefakech alav et agal. So that in fact would be a machloket with the way I understand Shmuel. So if what I said is all true, so now I have, on the one hand, I have Shmuel who says, Lo hachu b'pikuach nefesh achar harov, but I have Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, both his contemporaries, who say, no, even in pikuach nefesh, I go after the rov. So the question is going to be, if you're a posek, who do you paskin by? So you might say, look, two of Shmuel's contemporaries, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, both disagree with it. So that would argue for saying that I shouldn't paskin like Shmuel. And on the other hand, because of the way we learn Gemara, the Gemara finishes the sugya by trying to uphold Shmuel. So maybe the editor of the Gemara was still trying to argue that nonetheless, even though Rabbi Yochanan and Rav disagree with him, that halacha is like Shmuel. And so we'll see. This is actually a machloket rishonim about who I paskin by. And we'll see that next time. Okay? Very good. Any last questions or comments? Okay.
I'd say that your Facebook frame looks very Caravaggio.
I hope my head is still attached to my body.
Actually, the way the frame is, that's not clear.
Right. Just hoping for myself. Okay. Take it easy. Bezrat Hashem, I'll be back next week, and I'll see you then.
Head and body both, yes.
Right, the whole thing.
Good
Bye-bye.
night. Good night. Thank you. Nasiya tova.
Bye bye.